I thought my life was perfect. My name is Daniel Hart, and I had it all. At least I believed I did. A loving wife, Julia, who could light up any room. Two incredible kids, Lily and Ben, who reminded me every day what life was really about. And a career as an architect, where I built homes for other people while cherishing the one I'd built for my family. But even the strongest structures can have hidden cracks. It started subtly. Julia began spending more time working late on her new business venture, something she'd been vague about from the start. When I asked her about it, she brushed me off with a laugh. "You wouldn't be interested," she'd say, her smile dazzling but hollow. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that the woman I'd loved for over a decade wouldn't hide things from me. But then there were the texts. One evening, as Julia sat beside me on the couch, her phone buzzed. She tilted the screen just enough for me to catch a glimpse of the message. "We need to talk." Who's that?" I asked casually, though my stomach tightened. "Marcus," she replied too quickly. "He's my business partner." Something in her tone made my skin prickle. "What kind of business is this exactly?" She sighed, her smile faltering. "It's complicated, Daniel. Just trust me, okay?" I nodded, but my mind was already racing. Trust wasn't something you asked for. It was something you earned. That night, as Julia slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling, the first seeds of doubt taking root. The days after that cryptic text from Marcus were tense, though Julia acted as if nothing had changed. She was the picture of normalcy, making breakfast for the kids, laughing at Ben's silly jokes, and humming while she folded laundry. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being played. Curiosity got the better of me one evening when Julia was in the shower. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, and my eyes immediately darted to the screen. The notification read, "Tomorrow, 8 p.m., same place, M." I didn't recognize the number, but the initials left no doubt about who it was. My pulse quickened as I slipped out of the room, grabbed my laptop, and did something I never thought I'd do. I logged into her phone account. It wasn't hard. We'd set up the account together years ago, and I still knew her password. What I found made my stomach twist. Dozens of calls and texts between Julia and Marcus over the past month, all at odd hours. Late-night conversations, meeting confirmations, and vague messages like, "We'll need to keep this quiet for now." The shower turned off, and I quickly closed the laptop, my hands shaking. My mind raced with questions. Was this a business relationship, as she claimed, or was it something more? The next evening, I decided to find out. "Working late again?" I asked as she grabbed her coat and purse. "Yeah," she said, not meeting my eyes. "It's crunch time for the new project." "Which project is that?" I pressed. She hesitated for a split second. "Just a branding thing. I'll explain later." As soon as she left, I followed her. My heart pounded as I tailed her car through the city, keeping a careful distance. She pulled into the parking lot of a swanky downtown hotel, a place far too upscale for a casual business meeting. From my spot across the street, I watched as Marcus emerged from the lobby. He was tall and polished, with an air of confidence that made me instantly dislike him. Julia greeted him with a warm smile, and they walked inside together. I sat there for what felt like hours, my mind spiraling. What was she doing? Why hadn't she told me the truth? And, most painfully, had she ever intended to? When she finally came home later that night, I was sitting in the living room, waiting. "Hey," she said, feigning nonchalance as she hung up her coat. "How was the branding thing?" I asked, my voice cold. Her smile faltered. "Fine. Long day." "Didn't look like a long day," I said, standing up. "Looked more like dinner at the Grandview Hotel with Marcus." Her eyes widened in shock, but she quickly masked it with anger. "You followed me? You didn't leave me much of a choice," I snapped. "You've been lying to me, Julia. I want to know why." "It's not what you think," she said, her voice trembling. "We were discussing a deal. That's all." "Don't insult me," I said, my voice rising. "What kind of deal requires sneaking around behind my back?" She stared at me, tears welling in her eyes. "I can't tell you yet, Daniel. Please, just trust me." Those words again, trust me. But how could I, when every action she took chipped away at the foundation of our marriage? I turned away, too angry and hurt to continue the conversation. But one thing was clear. I couldn't ignore this any longer. The unraveling had begun, and there was no turning back. The next morning, the house felt heavier than usual. Julia tried to act normal, but her movements were stiff, her smile forced. I barely said a word, too angry to engage. It didn't take long for her frustration to boil over. "We can't keep doing this," she said sharply as the kids ran upstairs to grab their backpacks for school. "Doing what?" I replied, my voice flat. "This," she exclaimed, gesturing between us. "You treating me like I'm some criminal, following me around like I'm doing something wrong." I turned to face her, my anger simmering just below the surface. "And are you, Julia?" Because sneaking off to hotels with Marcus certainly doesn't scream honesty. Her face reddened, and for a moment, I thought she might finally admit to something. But instead, she crossed her arms and deflected. "I can't believe you don't trust me," she said, her voice trembling with both anger and hurt. "After everything we've been through, you think I'm what? Cheating on you?" I hesitated, her tears giving me pause. This was the woman I'd loved for over a decade, the mother of my children. But those same tears were now a weapon, one she wielded skillfully. "Then explain it," I said quietly. "Explain the late-night texts, the secret meetings, the lies. Because right now, it feels like you're hiding something, Julia, and I deserve to know what it is." She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I can't tell you yet," she whispered. "Not because I don't want to, but because it's complicated." "There's that word again," I snapped. "Complicated. Everything is always complicated with you lately. Why can't you just give me the truth?" "Because you won't understand," she shouted, her voice breaking. "You'll jump to conclusions, just like you're doing now." I stared at her, trying to decipher the mix of fear and defiance in her eyes. For a fleeting moment, I wondered if she was telling the truth. Maybe I was jumping to conclusions. Maybe I'd let my insecurities warp my perception. But then I remembered the texts, the meetings, the lies. "I'm done playing this game, Julia," I said firmly. "You need to decide what's more important, whatever it is you're hiding, or this family." Her face crumpled, and she turned away, wiping her tears. "I'm trying to protect you, Daniel. Don't you see that?" "From what?" I demanded. She didn't answer. The kids came barreling down the stairs, their laughter filling the tense silence. I forced a smile and helped them get their coats on, trying to act like everything was fine. But inside, I was unraveling. As I watched Julia drive them to school, a pit formed in my stomach. She wasn't protecting me. She was protecting herself. And whatever she was hiding, it was bigger than I'd imagined. By the time Julia returned from dropping off the kids, I was already at the office, throwing myself into work as a distraction. But my thoughts kept drifting back to her. I felt trapped in a maze, every path leading to dead ends of doubt and anger. That afternoon, Rachel, my longtime coworker and one of the few people I trusted completely, stopped by my desk. "You look like hell," she said bluntly, setting her coffee cup down. "Thanks," I muttered, running a hand through my hair. She sat down, her sharp eyes narrowing. "What's going on, Daniel? You've been distracted for weeks. Don't tell me it's just deadlines." I hesitated, unsure if I should burden her with my problems. But Rachel wasn't the kind of person you could brush off easily. "It's Julia," I admitted finally. "I think she's hiding something. Maybe someone." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "Someone like Marcus Reed?" I froze. "You know him?" "Not personally," she said, leaning back in her chair. "But I know the type. He's got a reputation, slick, charming, always working some angle. I've heard whispers about shady business deals and affairs that ruin people's lives." Her words sent a chill through me. "Are you saying Julia's involved in something illegal?" Rachel shrugged. "I don't know. But if Marcus is in the picture, it's worth looking into." The thought made my stomach churn. Julia had always been ambitious, but reckless. That was a side of her I'd never seen, or perhaps never wanted to see. Rachel leaned forward, her tone softening. "Look, I know this is tearing you up, but you need to be smart about this. Don't confront her unless you have solid proof. Otherwise, she'll just gaslight you and make you doubt yourself." I nodded, grateful for her advice. "How do I get proof?" She smirked, pulling out her phone. "Lucky for you, I got a friend who's a PI. Discreet, thorough, and not too pricey. Want his number?" I hesitated, the idea of spying on my wife feeling both invasive and necessary. Finally, I nodded. "Yeah, give it to me." That evening, after Julia and the kids were asleep, I called the investigator. His name was Alan, and his no-nonsense demeanor immediately put me at ease. You want the truth, no matter what it is? He asked bluntly. Yes, I said, my voice firm. Then give me a week, he replied. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. If Julia was innocent, Alan would prove it. And if she wasn't, the thought was too painful to finish. The next few days passed in a blur. I threw myself into work, spent as much time as I could with the kids, and avoided Julia whenever possible. She noticed, of course. You're distant, she said one night as we lay in bed. Are you still mad at me? I am used to it, Elid. She reached for my hand, her touch both familiar and foreign. We'll get through this, Daniel. I promise. I wanted to believe her. But deep down, I knew the promise was as empty as the space growing between us. When Alan called me a few days later, his voice was grim. I've got something, he said. You're going to want to see this in person. I hung up, my heart pounding. Whatever Julia was hiding, the truth was finally within reach. The next morning, I met Alan at a quiet diner on the edge of town. He was waiting in a corner booth, a manila folder on the table between his coffee cup and a half-eaten slice of pie. His expression was as serious as I felt. Here, he said, sliding the folder toward me as I sat down. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. Inside were photographs, documents, and a written summary of his findings. The first photo stopped me cold. It was Julia and Marcus, sitting in what looked like a sleek office space. They weren't laughing or flirting. They were poring over papers, their expressions intense. The next few photos showed them at various locations. The lobby of a high-rise building, a parking lot, a late-night diner. They've been meeting regularly, Alan said. Mostly business hours, but a few late-night rendezvous too. Here's the interesting part. He tapped the summary sheet. They're working on something together, a real estate deal. Marcus has been brokering properties under a dummy corporation, and Julia's name is tied to some of the transactions. It's all very hush-hush, no public records under their real names. I frowned, my mind racing. A real estate deal? Julia's never mentioned anything like this. She's not even in that field. Alan nodded. Exactly. Which is why this doesn't add up. She's out of her depth here. But Marcus? He's got experience in property flipping. Problem is, he's also been involved in fraudulent deals before. The word fraudulent made my stomach twist. Are you saying she's mixed up in something illegal? Alan leaned back, his expression grim. Maybe. Or maybe she doesn't know what Marcus is really up to. But from the outside, it doesn't look good. The properties they're dealing with are in low-income neighborhoods, sold at inflated prices to shell companies. Classic scheme to launder money or defraud buyers. I stared at the folder, anger simmering beneath my shock. Why would Julia do this? She's smart enough to see through someone like Marcus. Alan shrugged. Maybe he sold her on the idea. Maybe he's leveraging something against her. Or maybe he hesitated. Maybe she's not the person you think she is. The words hung in the air like a bad smell. I closed the folder and took a deep breath. Does Marcus have a history of coercion? Alan nodded. Plenty. He's not just a fraudster. He's manipulative. He has a way of making people think they're in control, even when he's pulling the strings. I clenched my fists. The idea of Julia being manipulated, or worse, willingly going along with something like this, made my blood boil. Keep digging, I said. I need to know exactly what they're planning. Alan nodded, slipping out of the booth. I'll be in touch. When I got home, Julia was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. She looked up and smiled, but I couldn't return it. How was work? She asked casually. Fine, I said, my voice tight. She paused, her knife hovering above the cutting board. Is everything okay? You've been distant. I forced a smile. Just a lot on my plate. She nodded, but I could see the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. As I sat down to dinner with Julia and the kids that night, I felt like a stranger in my own home. Every laugh, every word, every glance between us was tainted by the knowledge of what I'd uncovered. Julia was hiding something, and whether she was a victim or a willing participant, I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. I barely slept that night. The photographs, the documents, the idea that Julia was involved in something so reckless. It all churned in my mind like a storm I couldn't escape. By the time the sun rose, I had made a decision. If Julia wouldn't tell me the truth, I'd find it myself. The first step was accessing our joint finances. We'd always kept things transparent, at least I thought we had, but when I logged into our accounts, I found nothing unusual. Every transaction matched what I knew about our daily lives. I almost gave up, but something told me to dig deeper. Then I saw it. A recurring transfer of $3,000 every month to an account I didn't recognize. It wasn't one of ours, and it wasn't tied to any bills or expenses I knew about. The account number was familiar, though, a faint memory tugging at the edges of my mind. I cross-referenced it with old paperwork and found the connection. It was a private account Julia had opened years ago, back when we first got married. At the time, it was supposed to be her rainy day fund, something we'd both agreed on. But I hadn't thought about it in years. Why was she suddenly funneling money into it? My heart pounded as I traced the transactions. Over the past 8 months, nearly $25,000 had been transferred into that account. And from there, large chunks of it were withdrawn in cash. Cash. The implications hit me like a freight train. Cash couldn't be tracked. Cash couldn't leave a trail. My hands shook as I printed out the statements. The weight of the betrayal was crushing. Julia wasn't just keeping secrets, she was hiding money. And given what I'd just learned about her dealings with Marcus, I could only imagine what it was for. When Julia came home later that evening, I was waiting for her in the living room, the printed statements spread out on the coffee table. She froze when she saw them, her face draining of color. "What's this?" I asked, my voice cold. Her eyes darted to the papers, then back to me. "Daniel, I can explain." "Good," I said, standing up. "Because right now, it looks like you've been siphoning money into a private account behind my back. And given everything else I've found, I think I deserve an explanation." She swallowed hard, her hands trembling. "It's not what you think." "Then tell me." I snapped. "Tell me why you've been lying to me, Julia. Because if you don't, I'm going to assume the worst." She sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. "I was trying to protect us," she whispered. "Protect us?" I repeated, my anger boiling over. "From what? Marcus? The fraud you're helping him commit?" Her head shot up, her eyes wide with shock. "Fraud? What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb," I said, tossing the folder of Alan's findings onto the table. "I know about the real estate deals. I know about the shell companies. And I know you've been working with Marcus behind my back." Her lips quivered, and for a moment, I thought she might confess. But then her expression hardened. "You had me followed?" she said, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and fear. "Yes," I said unapologetically, "because you've been lying to me for months. And now I know why." Her hands clenched into fists. "You don't understand, Daniel. It's not like that." "Then explain it," I demanded. She looked away, her shoulders slumping. "I can't. Not yet. Not yet," I barked. "You're funneling money, lying about your meetings, and working with a man who's a known con artist. What part of this am I supposed to understand, Julia?" She didn't respond, tears streaming down her face. The silence between us was deafening, broken only by the sound of my own heavy breathing. Finally, I spoke. "If you can't tell me the truth, Julia, I don't see how we can move forward. You're tearing this family apart." She wiped her tears, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just need more time. Please, Daniel. Trust me." Those words again, trust me. But trust was a bridge she'd already burned. As I turned and walked out of the room, one thought consumed me. Whatever Julia was hiding, it wasn't just about Marcus. It was about us. The days following our confrontation were a whirlwind of tension and confusion. Julia's refusal to explain herself left me questioning everything I thought I knew about her and about us. But what came next wasn't an apology or an attempt to make amends. Instead, Julia turned the tables, rewriting the narrative in a way that left me second-guessing my own reality. It started subtly. "You've been so distant lately," she said one morning as we got the kids ready for school. "I feel like I don't even know you anymore." Her words caught me off guard. "I've been distant?" I asked, incredulous. She sighed, avoiding my eyes. "Yes, you're always working late or locked in your office. It's like you've already decided I'm the villain in your story." "I wonder why," I muttered under my breath. She shot me a hurt look. "You're twisting things, Daniel. I've been honest with you. You're the one who's been keeping secrets." I froze, my jaw tightening. "Keeping secrets? You've got to be kidding me." But the seeds were planted. Over the next few days, she continued to chip away at my confidence, framing herself as the victim in this unraveling marriage. "You've been spying on me," she said one evening as we sat in tense silence over dinner. "Do you know how humiliating that feels?" What's humiliating is being lied to, I shot back. Her eyes filled with tears. I've done everything for this family, Daniel. Everything. And now you're treating me like I'm some kind of criminal. The shift in tone was jarring. Suddenly, I wasn't just the betrayed husband. I was the bad guy. It escalated during a conversation with Rachel. I'd filled her in on the latest developments, and she listened with her usual sharp focus. She's gaslighting you, Rachel said bluntly. I frowned. What are you talking about? She's flipping the narrative to make you doubt yourself, Rachel explained. By the time she's done, you'll feel like you're the one who's guilty. I wanted to argue, to defend Julia despite everything. But deep down, I knew Rachel was right. Julia wasn't just hiding something. She was actively trying to rewrite the story. That night, Julia confronted me again. Why are you so angry all the time? She asked, her voice soft and tinged with sadness. What happened to the man I married? Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I could ask you the same thing, I said quietly. She sighed, her shoulders slumping. I'm not perfect, Daniel. I've made mistakes. But this thing you're doing, it's tearing us apart. For a moment, I almost believed her. Almost. But then I remembered the hidden account, the photos of her and Marcus, the lies that had piled up between us. I'm not the one tearing us apart, I said, my voice firm. That's on you. She flinched, but her tears didn't sway me this time. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, a question haunted me. How much of what she said was true? I was determined to find out. Despite Julia's tears and manipulations, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her story. The pieces didn't fit. Her secretive meetings, the hidden bank account, her gaslighting attempts to make me doubt myself. I needed answers. I reached out to Alan again, asking him to dig deeper into the financial side of things. If Julia was hiding money, there had to be a reason. And if Marcus was involved, I wanted to know exactly how. Alan called me 2 days later. Meet me at the office, he said, his voice tense. I found something big. When I arrived, Alan slid a stack of papers across the desk. Your wife and Marcus aren't just hiding money. They've been racking up debts in your name. I blinked, the words taking a moment to register. Debts? What kind of debts? Alan leaned back, his expression grim. Credit lines, business loans, even a second mortgage on your house. All tied to fraudulent real estate deals Marcus has been orchestrating. Julia's signature is on half of them. My blood ran cold as I flipped through the documents. Each one was more damning than the last. My name and Julia's appeared side by side on loans I hadn't even known existed. And the amounts were staggering, hundreds of thousands of dollars. They're using you as collateral, Alan continued. If their deals go south, the creditors will come after you. I clenched my fists, rage boiling beneath the surface. She's dragging me down with her, I muttered. Alan nodded. It gets worse. Marcus is already under investigation for similar schemes in other cities. If he goes down, Julia's going down with him. And so are you. The weight of his words crushed me. I'd worked my whole life to build a stable future for my family. And now, it was all on the verge of collapse. Can we prove I didn't know about any of this? I asked, my voice tight. Maybe, Alan said cautiously. But it'll be an uphill battle. Right now, on paper, you look complicit. When I got home that night, Julia was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables like nothing was wrong. The sight of her, so calm and collected, made my blood boil. Why didn't you tell me? I demanded, slamming the papers onto the counter. She jumped, her knife clattering onto the cutting board. Tell you what, about the debts, the loans, the second mortgage on our house. I shouted. Her face paled, but she quickly recovered, crossing her arms defensively. You've been snooping again. Don't you dare deflect, I snapped. You've been lying to me for months, Julia. You've tied me to Marcus's schemes, put our family at risk, and now you're acting like it's no big deal. Tears filled her eyes, but I was too angry to care. I didn't have a choice, she said finally. What does that even mean? I demanded. She hesitated, her lips trembling. Marcus, he convinced me it was a good idea. He said it was a quick way to make money, to secure our future. I didn't know it would spiral out of control. Her words felt hollow, like an excuse she'd rehearsed 1,000 times. You expect me to believe that? I said coldly. You signed my name on loans without telling me. You mortgaged our house. And for what? Some get-rich-quick scheme? She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. I thought I was helping us, Daniel. I swear. Helping us? I repeated, my voice rising. You've destroyed everything, Julia. Our finances, our marriage, our trust. How am I supposed to believe anything you say anymore? She didn't answer. She just sank onto the floor, sobbing into her hands. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. But then I remembered Alan's warning. If Marcus went down, I'd go down too. I couldn't let that happen. As I walked out of the room, Julia's sobs echoed behind me. But this time, they didn't sway me. I had to protect myself and my kids. Julia's tears haunted me for days, but my anger outweighed any sympathy I might have felt. Her reckless decisions had put our family in danger, and her continued refusal to come clean only deepened the divide between us. But as much as I hated what she'd done, I couldn't ignore the bigger picture. Marcus was the mastermind behind all of this, and if I didn't act fast, he would destroy not only my family but also my reputation. I called Alan again. We need to dig deeper, I said. Find out exactly what Marcus is planning, and how I can stop him before it's too late. Alan didn't hesitate. I've already started looking into his past deals. There's a pattern, and it's not pretty. A few days later, Alan sent me a report that painted a chilling picture. Marcus had been running similar scams for years, targeting vulnerable people, small business owners, couples struggling with debt, even retirees. He would rope them into shady deals under the guise of a lucrative opportunity, then leave them holding the bag when the schemes inevitably collapsed. The worst part? He always had a scapegoat. In every instance, Marcus had someone else sign off on the deals, ensuring that when the authorities came knocking, he could walk away unscathed. His victims were left bankrupt, their lives in ruins, while Marcus moved on to the next target. And now, I was his scapegoat. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Marcus hadn't just manipulated Julia. He'd used her to get to me. My name, my reputation, my career, they were all on the line because of him. That night, I confronted Julia again. Do you even realize what Marcus is doing? I demanded, throwing the report onto the kitchen counter. She flinched, her eyes darting to the papers. What is this? Proof, I said coldly. Proof that Marcus has been running the same scam for years. And now he's using us. Using me to cover his tracks. Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought she might deny it. But then she sank into a chair, burying her face in her hands. I didn't know, she whispered. Didn't you? I shot back. You knew he was shady, Julia. You knew what kind of person he was, and you still trusted him. You still let him drag us into this mess. She looked up, her eyes filled with tears. I thought it was different this time. He said it was foolproof, that we'd make enough money to get ahead. And you believed him? I said, my voice rising. You mortgaged our house, forged my name on loans, and funneled money into a private account. All because of Marcus? She didn't respond, her silence damning. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my anger. We need to get out of this, Julia. Now. If Marcus goes down, he'll take us with him. She nodded weakly, but I wasn't convinced she fully grasped the gravity of the situation. The next day, I called my lawyer and laid everything out. We need to prove that I had no knowledge of these deals, I said. And we need to cut ties with Marcus completely. My lawyer nodded. It'll be tricky, but not impossible. If we can show that Julia and Marcus acted independently, you might be able to avoid liability. But it's going to take time and a lot of work. Time was a luxury I wasn't sure I had. That evening, as I sat in my office, trying to piece together a plan, my phone buzzed with a text from Alan. We have a problem. Call me ASAP. My heart sank as I dialed his number. It's Marcus, Alan said as soon as he picked up. He knows we're onto him. What do you mean? I asked, my stomach twisting. He's covering his tracks, Alan said. I just got word that he's shifting assets and destroying documents. If we don't act fast, he'll disappear, and you'll be left holding the bag. The weight of his words hit me like a ton of bricks. Marcus was one step ahead, and if I didn't act quickly, he'd leave me to take the fall for everything. I hung up and stared at my phone, 1,000 thoughts racing through my mind. This wasn't just about uncovering the truth anymore. It was about survival. Alan's call left me shaken. Marcus's scheme was spiraling out of control, and with each passing day, my family and career were in greater jeopardy. But what came next blindsided me in ways I couldn't have imagined. The following evening, as I was poring over documents in my office, Julia walked in. Her face was pale, her hands trembling. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I looked up wary. "This should be good." She hesitated, her eyes welling with tears. "It's about Marcus." My stomach tightened. "What about him?" She sat down across from me, her gaze fixed on the floor. "It wasn't just business," she said finally. I had feelings for him." The room seemed to tilt. "Feelings?" I repeated, my voice cold. She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "It started out as just work, but over time we got closer. I was lonely, Daniel. You were always busy with work, and I felt invisible." I stared at her, struggling to process her words. "So what are you saying, Julia? That you had an affair?" She shook her head frantically. "No, it wasn't physical. I swear. But I confided in him. I told him things I never told you." My hands clenched in a fist. "Things like what? That you were willing to jeopardize our family's future for some get-rich-quick scheme?" She flinched, her tears flowing freely now. "I know I made a mistake. I let things go too far. But I never stopped loving you, Daniel. I didn't know how to fix what was broken between us." Her words felt like a dagger to my chest. For months, I had been fighting to uncover the truth, to piece together the fragments of our crumbling marriage. And now, to hear her admit that she had emotionally turned to Marcus, it was almost too much to bear. "You let him manipulate you," I said quietly, my voice trembling with anger. "You let him worm his way into our lives, into our finances, into you. And now you expect me to what? Forgive you." "I don't expect anything," she whispered. "I just wanted to tell you the truth. You deserve that much." For a moment, I didn't know what to say. The woman sitting in front of me was both familiar and alien, a reflection of the person I'd loved for over a decade, warped by betrayal and deceit. Finally, I spoke. "You said it wasn't physical. Do you swear on our children?" Her eyes widened in shock, and she nodded fervently. "I swear, Daniel. On Lily and Ben." I studied her face, searching for any sign of dishonesty. If she was lying, she was doing a damn good job of hiding it. "Even if it wasn't physical, Julia, it doesn't change what you've done," I said, my voice cold. "You've destroyed my trust. And for what? Some fantasy about a man who saw you as nothing more than a pawn." She sobbed quietly, but I felt no sympathy. As I left the room, her words echoed in my mind. "I never stopped loving you." But love wasn't enough to undo the damage she caused. Later that night, as I lay awake in the guest room, a new fear crept into my mind. What if she wasn't telling me everything? What if Marcus hadn't just manipulated her, but was using their connection to destroy me entirely? I couldn't shake the feeling that there was still more to this story. Julia's confession left me reeling, but I knew one thing for certain. Marcus wasn't finished with us. If he was already destroying documents and shifting assets, he was laying the groundwork to leave me holding the bag. And then he made his move. 2 days after Julia's confession, I received an official-looking envelope in the mail. My stomach sank as I opened it, revealing a lawsuit filed against me by one of Marcus's dummy corporations. The claim? Breach of contract and financial malfeasance. "They're blaming me," I said aloud, the papers shaking in my hands. Julia, who was sitting at the kitchen table, looked up in alarm. "What are you talking about?" I threw the documents onto the table. "Marcus. He's suing me through one of his fake companies, probably to cover his tracks. This is how he's going to pin the entire scheme on me." Her face went pale as she skimmed the papers. "He can't do that. He's the one who you helped?" I snapped, cutting her off. "Your name is on half of these deals, Julia. And now he's making me the scapegoat." Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't care. "We need to fight this," she said urgently. "You think I don't know that?" I shot back. "But fighting this is going to cost us everything. Money, time, and whatever's left of my reputation." The weight of her betrayal, combined with Marcus's attack, was almost too much to bear. But I couldn't afford to crumble. I called my lawyer immediately, filling her in on the latest development. She was unsurprised. "Marcus's lawsuits are designed to intimidate and deflect attention," she explained. "But we have leverage. If we can prove that this was a fraudulent scheme orchestrated by him, the case will collapse." "How do we do that?" I asked. "Documentation, witnesses, anything that ties him to the fraud. And if Julia is willing to testify, it could make all the difference." I glanced at Julia, who was listening from across the room. Her face was a mix of fear and determination. "I'll do it," she said quietly. That night, as I prepared the documents my lawyer had requested, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You think you can win, Daniel? I own you." I stared at the message, anger and fear bubbling to the surface. It didn't take a genius to figure out who it was. Marcus wasn't just trying to ruin me. He was enjoying it. The next morning, my lawyer filed a countersuit against Marcus and his dummy corporations, accusing him of fraud and defamation. The legal battle had officially begun, but I knew it wouldn't end in the courtroom. 2 nights later, the first threat came. I was home alone. Julia had taken the kids to her parents' house for the weekend, when I heard a crash outside. My heart pounded as I grabbed a flashlight and stepped onto the porch. The windshield of my car was shattered, and a brick lay on the hood. A note was tied to it, scrawled in angry, uneven handwriting. "Drop the case or else." My hands shook as I called the police. The responding officer took my statement, but his shrug said everything I needed to know. "Probably just kids messing around," he said. But I knew better. The next morning, I called Alan. "I need you to dig up everything you can on Marcus," I said. "I don't care how deep you have to go. Just find something I can use against him." Alan didn't hesitate. "I've got a few leads I've been working on. Give me a day or 2. In the meantime, I stayed vigilant. I installed cameras around the house, double-checked the locks, and made sure Julia and the kids were safe. But the tension was suffocating. When Alan called me 3 days later, his voice was grim. "I found something," he said, "and you're not going to like it." "What is it?" I asked, bracing myself. He hesitated before replying. "Marcus isn't just targeting you for money. He's got a personal vendetta, and Julie is at the center of it." My blood ran cold. "What are you saying?" Alan sighed. "There's more to their relationship than she's let on, and Marcus isn't going to stop until he gets what he wants." As I hung up the phone, a new wave of fear and anger consumed me. Julia had promised to tell me the truth, but it was clear there were still secrets she hadn't revealed. And if I didn't uncover them soon, Marcus would destroy everything I had left. Alan's words echoed in my mind for days. "Marcus isn't just targeting you for money. He's got a personal vendetta, and Julia is at the center of it." I tried to confront Julia that evening, but she was unusually withdrawn, avoiding eye contact and giving me vague answers to my questions. It was as if she knew I was closing in on something she didn't want me to find. I couldn't wait for her to tell me the truth. Alan sent me his latest findings the next morning, a series of emails between Marcus and Julia from over 2 years ago. Unlike their recent business communications, these emails were far more personal and far more damning. "I miss the way we used to talk," one read, signed by Marcus. "We can't keep doing this," Julia had replied. "Daniel will find out eventually." My stomach twisted as I scrolled through the messages. There was no explicit mention of an affair, but the tone was unmistakable. Marcus hadn't just manipulated Julia into his schemes. He'd been working his way into her life long before this mess began. The final email was the most chilling. "You owe me, Julia. Don't forget that." I stared at the screen, anger and betrayal coursing through me. What did Marcus mean? What could Julia possibly owe him that was worth risking everything? That evening, after the kids were in bed, I confronted her. "Care to explain this?" I asked, throwing the printed emails onto the kitchen table. Julia froze, her face draining of color. "Where did you get those? Does it matter?" I snapped. "You've been lying to me for years, Julia. This wasn't just business. It was personal. So tell me the truth. What does Marcus have on you?" Her hands trembled as she sank into a chair. For a moment, I thought she might deny it again, but then she looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. "It wasn't supposed to go this far," she whispered. "Go this far?" I repeated, my voice rising. "What does that mean? Did you have an affair with him?" "No," she said quickly, shaking her head. "It wasn't like that. But Marcus, he helped me once, years ago, and he's been holding it over my head ever since." "Helped you?" I asked, incredulous. "With what?" Her gaze dropped to the floor. "Before Ben was born, I made a mistake. I got involved in a bad investment, one of Marcus's early deals. I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to worry. When it fell apart, I owed more money than I could pay back. Marcus covered it, but he said I'd have to repay him one day. And you didn't think to tell me this before?" I asked, my voice shaking. "I thought I could handle it," she said, her tears falling freely now. I thought if I helped him with this one project, it would be enough. But he kept pushing for more. And then I couldn't stop it. Her confession hit me like a punch to the gut. Julia hadn't just been a pawn in Marcus's schemes. She'd willingly stepped into his web, thinking she could outmaneuver him. And the money? I asked. The hidden account, the loans in my name, what was that for? She hesitated, her voice barely above a whisper. To keep him quiet. I clenched my fists, rage boiling beneath the surface. So you mortgaged our future to cover up your mistakes? To protect yourself from a man who's been blackmailing you for years? I didn't know what else to do, she sobbed. I thought I was protecting us. I thought. You weren't protecting us, I interrupted, my voice cold. You were protecting yourself. And now, because of you, Marcus has everything he needs to destroy me. Her sobs grew louder, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. Instead, I walked out of the room, my mind racing with anger and desperation. Julia's betrayal had shattered what little trust one had left, and now Marcus was poised to ruin everything I'd worked for. I couldn't let that happen. As I sat in my office, staring at the pile of evidence Alan had gathered, one thought consumed me. If Julia couldn't stop Marcus, I would have to do it myself. Julia's confession left me gutted, but I didn't have time to dwell on the pain. Marcus was closing in, and every moment I spent reeling was a moment he could use to tighten the noose. I needed to act fast. But just as I began piecing together a plan, Julia made her next move, a move that blindsided me completely. It started with a phone call I wasn't supposed to overhear. Julia was in the living room, speaking in hushed tones. The kids were playing upstairs, and I had just stepped into the hallway when I heard her say his name. Marcus! I froze, my blood running cold. I'm doing what you asked, she said, her voice trembling. But this is the last time, Marcus. I mean it. My heart pounded as I edged closer, careful not to make a sound. No, she continued, her tone more desperate now. You're not dragging Daniel into this any further. I'll handle it, but you need to leave my family alone. I clenched my fists, anger coursing through me. What was she planning? The call ended abruptly, and I stepped back into the shadows as Julia walked into the hallway, her expression a mix of fear and resolve. She didn't see me watching her. The next morning, I found her at the dining table with a laptop and a pile of documents spread out in front of her. What's all this? I asked, my voice icy. She jumped, slamming the laptop shut. It's nothing, she said quickly. Just sorting out the finances. Like hell, it's nothing. I snapped, stepping closer. What are you up to, Julia? And don't you dare lie to me. Her face crumpled, but instead of denying it, she surprised me. I'm trying to fix it, she said, her voice breaking. I'm trying to get us out of this mess. By doing what? I demanded. Cutting more deals with Marcus? Mortgaging what little we have left. She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. No, I'm liquidating everything. You stay out here, stunned. What? She took a shaky breath. The hidden account, the loans, the investments, I'm pulling everything. I'm going to give Marcus the money he wants so he'll leave us alone. The weight of her words hit me like a ton of bricks. You think paying him off is going to solve this? Julia, he's not going to stop. He'll keep coming back, demanding more. That's how people like him operate. What else am I supposed to do? She cried. If we don't give him what he wants, he'll destroy us, Daniel. He'll take everything. I shook my head, fury and disbelief colliding in my chest. So your solution is to hand him our entire future? To give him the satisfaction of knowing he's won? Her sobs grew louder, and she buried her face in her hands. I thought I could fix this, she whispered. I thought I could make it all go away. I stared at her, my anger warring with a flicker of pity. Julia had always been a fighter, but now she looked broken, like someone who had run out of options and hope. But I wasn't ready to give up. That's not how this ends, I said firmly. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with confusion. We're not paying Marcus a damn thing, I continued. If he wants a fight, we'll give him one. But we're not handing over our lives to a man like him. Julia hesitated, then nodded weakly. What do we do? I took a deep breath, the weight of the decision settling on my shoulders. We expose him. We gather every piece of evidence we have and take it to the authorities. If he goes down, he's not taking us with him. Her face crumpled again, but this time, there was a flicker of hope in her eyes. You really think we can beat him? She asked quietly. I nodded, more for myself than for her. We don't have a choice. As I walked out of the room, determination coursing through me, I knew one thing for certain. Marcus had underestimated me. And now I was going to make him pay. Marcus wasn't going to stop unless I stopped him first. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about power, control, and the twisted hold he had over Julia and my family. I worked late into the night with Alan, piecing together the mountain of evidence we collected. Fraudulent transactions, fake corporations, shell accounts, and even testimonies from 2 of Marcus's past victims. "This is enough to bury him," Alan said grimly as we reviewed the final dossier. "Let's make sure it does," I replied. The next day, I filed an official complaint with the district attorney's office. Alan assured me that the evidence was airtight, but even with that reassurance, I felt a gnawing sense of dread. Marcus wasn't the type to go down quietly. My fears were confirmed that evening. Julia and I were sitting in the living room, trying to keep the mood light for the kids, when the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Marcus standing on the porch, his smile as cold as steel. "Evening, Daniel," he said casually, as if we were old friends. I stepped outside, closing the door behind me. "What the hell do you want?" His smile widened. "Oh, just a friendly chat. I hear you've been busy, poking around where you shouldn't be." I crossed my arms, refusing to be intimidated. "Your games are over, Marcus. I've turned everything over to the DA. You're finished." His expression darkened, and he stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You think you've won? You have no idea who you're dealing with. I can destroy you, Daniel. Your career, your family, your entire life. I can make it all disappear." I clenched my fists, forcing myself to stay calm. "You're done threatening me. The authorities are onto you, and soon, you'll be the one who's finished." He laughed, a hollow, menacing sound. "You think the law scares me? You're playing a game you don't understand." "Maybe not," I said, stepping forward to meet his gaze. "But I understand one thing. You're nothing without fear. And I'm not afraid of you anymore." For a moment, Marcus's mask slipped, and I saw the rage simmering beneath his polished exterior. But before he could respond, Julia appeared in the doorway. "Marcus, leave," she said, her voice trembling but firm. His eyes flicked to her, and his smirk returned. "Ah, Julia, always so dramatic." "This is your last chance," she said, her hands gripping the doorframe. "Walk away, or I'll make sure you regret it." Marcus's expression turned cold, and for a moment, I thought he might lash out. But then he stepped back, his smile returning. "You two think you've won," he said quietly. "But this isn't over." He turned and walked away, disappearing into the night. Back inside, Julia collapsed onto the couch, her hands shaking. "He's not going to stop, is he?" "No," I said, sitting beside her. "But neither are we." The following days were a blur of meetings with lawyers and investigators, preparing for the storm we knew was coming. The DA's office moved quickly, issuing a warrant for Marcus's arrest based on the evidence we provided. When the news broke, I felt a surge of relief, but it was short-lived. That evening, I received another text from Marcus. "You're going to regret this." I showed it to Alan, who assured me that Marcus was desperate and lashing out. But deep down, I knew the battle wasn't over yet. As the police closed in, Marcus vanished, leaving behind a trail of chaos. His assets were frozen, his businesses shuttered, and his accomplices arrested. But his final play was still to come. The days following Marcus's disappearance were tense, a mix of relief and unease. The authorities were confident they had enough evidence to convict him once he was found, but his sudden vanishing act left a shadow hanging over us. For the first time in months, Julia seemed lighter, as though the weight of Marcus's influence was finally lifting. But I wasn't ready to let my guard down. "You think he'll come back?" she asked one evening as we sat in the kitchen, the kids asleep upstairs. I hesitated, staring at the stack of court documents on the counter. People like Marcus don't go quietly. He'll try something. We just have to be ready. 2 days later, Marcus's final move came. Not in the form of threats, but in a letter addressed to Julia. I found it in the mailbox and opened it without hesitation, my hands trembling as I unfolded the paper. The message was short but chilling. "Julia, you'll never be free of me. Yours always, M." I handed it to Julia, watching as her face went pale. "He's still trying to control you," I said, my voice steady. "But it's over. He doesn't have any power anymore." She nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. I hate what I let him do to us, Daniel. To you, to the kids, to myself. For the first time, her words felt genuine. I'm done being scared of him, she continued, her voice gaining strength. I want to help finish this. Her determination surprised me, but I wasn't ready to fully trust her. What do you mean? I mean, I want to testify, she said. I'll tell the authorities everything about the loans, the fraud, the threats. It's the only way to make sure he never comes back. Her decision marked a turning point. For months, Julia had been complicit in Marcus's schemes, but now she was finally taking responsibility. The following week, she gave a full statement to the district attorney detailing everything Marcus had done and everything she had done to help him. Her confession was damning, but it also solidified the case against Marcus. Do you think they'll charge me? She asked quietly after the meeting. I don't know, I admitted, but owning up to it was the right thing to do. For the first time in months, I saw a flicker of the woman I'd fallen in love with. The one who was willing to fight for her family, no matter the cost. 2 weeks later, the authorities tracked Marcus down. He was arrested at a private airstrip, attempting to flee the country. The news brought a wave of relief, but it also signaled the end of a long and painful chapter. The aftermath. The legal battles dragged on for months, but with Julia's testimony and Alan's evidence, Marcus had no way out. He was convicted on multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, and extortion, sentenced to 20 years in prison. Julia, too, faced consequences. She avoided jail time, but was required to pay restitution for her role in the schemes. It was a harsh punishment, but one she accepted without complaint. For me, the hardest part was rebuilding trust, not just with Julia, but with myself. We started therapy, not as a couple, but as co-parents determined to give our kids the stability they deserved. Slowly, we began to find a new rhythm, one built on honesty, accountability, and cautious hope. One evening, as we watched Lily and Ben play in the backyard, Julia turned to me. Do you think we'll ever get back to the way things were? She asked. I shook my head, my gaze fixed on the kids. No, but maybe that's okay. Maybe we can build something better. She nodded, a small, hopeful smile on her lips. Final reflection. Looking back, I realized Marcus wasn't the only manipulator in this story. Julia had made choices that betrayed my trust, but she also found the strength to take responsibility and fight for redemption. As for me, I learned the value of trusting my instincts and the importance of setting boundaries, even with the people you love most. Our marriage didn't survive intact, but our family did. And in the end, that was what mattered most.